So when we think about the Puerto Rican diaspora, the timeline in our heads usually starts, what, 1898? Or maybe the Great Migration in the 50s.
Exactly. That's the
Yeah.
standard story. But the sources we're digging into today, I mean, they push that timeline back 3 whole centuries. It's a total reframe.
It really is. We're not looking at a late arrival story. The data suggests a foundational military presence in North America starting way back, around 1600.
It completely changes the island's role. The narrative shifts from Puerto Rico as this sort of passive agricultural place
Or right, just growing sugar.
to its real function as the Presidio of the Indies.
That phrase, Presidio of the Indies, it does a lot of work here. Reading through the notes, it sounds less like a typical Caribbean plantation and more like a state-funded military command center.
That's the absolute key. It was officially an ejército de dotación, a military colony. So while other islands were focused on profit, Puerto Rico's primary export was security.
Its job was to protect the treasure fleets.
To protect the fleets and to supply professional soldiers to the rest of the Spanish borderlands.
Okay, so that explains the Situado system. It reads less like trade and more like a massive federal payroll transfer from Mexico to San Juan and then straight up to Florida.
It was a logistical lifeline.
Yeah.
And because of that constant flow of men and money, San Juan and San Agustin became, well, sister presidios.
Sister Presidio. So they were that tightly linked.
Oh, yeah. Soldiers were constantly rotating between the Castillo de San Marcos in Florida and El Morro in Puerto Rico. They were basically 2 wings of the same defensive complex.
So if St. Augustine got hit by, say, a disease outbreak or an English raid, the cavalry wasn't coming from Madrid, it was coming from San Juan.
Correct. And you have to remember, that rotation builds deep family connections. The sources talk about the Canary Islander connection, the Oleños.
Right.
Families heading for the frontiers, like San Antonio, would often stop and put down roots in Puerto Rico first.
Creating this whole web of frontier cousins. So you're saying early Texans or Floridians could have had, like, immediate family back in Puerto Rico.
Absolutely. And this pipeline didn't just move people, it exported an entire military and social culture. Which brings us to Alejandro O'Reilly in the late 1700s.
The father of the Puerto Rican militia, a huge figure in these documents. He takes those professionalized units from Puerto Rico and brings them to Louisiana in 1769.
He does. But crucially, it's not just the soldiers he brings, it's their entire legal framework. Specifically, the Caribbean custom of courtation.
The right of self-purchase for enslaved people, that's a massive deal.
It's a critical nuance. That legal tradition allows for the growth of a distinct class of free people of color. It creates a 3-tiered society, white, free, and enslaved, that was just structurally different from the rigid binary system in the Anglo colonies.
Which helps explain why New Orleans always felt so different from, say, Boston. But speaking of the Anglo world, the logs from 1779 pull Puerto Rico right into the American Revolutionary War.
Yes. You focus on the French alliance, but the Spanish governor, Bernardo de Galvez, was using these Puerto Rican troops for a very specific strategic goal.
He needed to secure the Gulf Coast.
He had to lock it down, and that leads directly to the siege of Pensacola in 1781. This wasn't some minor skirmish. It was a major, decisive campaign fought by Puerto Rican regulars and militia.
And looking at the map, the stakes were incredibly high. If Galvez hadn't taken Pensacola, the British would have had a clear shot to just encircle the American rebels from the south.
Effectively, yes. By taking the Gulf Coast, those Puerto Rican soldiers were literally protecting George Washington's southern flank. They were integral to American independence.
Wow. So we have this deep integration, but then the map gets redrawn. 1821, Spain loses Florida to the U.S. Does that just sever the whole connection?
It forces a retreat. A lot of Floridanos, these families who'd been in Florida for generations, they evacuate back to Cuba and Puerto Rico. It becomes a kind of reverse migration.
And the whole story just goes quiet until, the cigar industry in Tampa starts up later. But the footprint is still there. The sources really argue that Puerto Rican history is American colonial history.
They weren't just adjacent to it. They were building and defending the borderlands from the very beginning.
It really leaves us with a provocative thought, then. If you have Puerto Rican soldiers defending the continental borders and fighting for American independence in the 1700s, why is their history still treated as something separate from the main American story and not foundational to it?
That is the question, isn't it?
Something for you to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.